Today, we are going to discuss Chapter 20 from the Smart Sales System, which is getting into new accounts. And more so, we're going to focus on getting engaged with new accounts, getting engaged with new prospects. And that really is one of the biggest challenges that a salesperson can face. A salesperson could have the best product on the market, could sell their product at the best available price, could have the best sales pitch, but none of those great things will do them much good if they're not able to get engaged and speak to new prospects. For example, we just talked about cold calling and creating a great cold call script. You could have the best cold call script and best sales pitch, but if you're never able to talk to prospects, that great script and great pitch will not do you much good. But the good news is that while this is extremely difficult, there are some things you can do to mitigate and minimize this challenge. And that's what we're going to talk about here today. We're going to talk about a concept called prospecting cadence, organizational movement, and concentrated prospecting. These are the levers that you can move up and down to improve your ability to get connected. And let's start by talking about prospecting cadence. If we look back to some of the previous things that we've discussed in this training program, we talked about cold calling and how to create your cold call script. We talked about cold emailing and creating cold email messages. And we talked about your strategy around voicemail and how to create good voicemail messages. Now, what we're going to talk about is how to put all of those together into a cadence and try to answer the question, well, if I'm cold calling, how many times should I call a prospect that I'm not able to connect with? How many emails should I send? How many voicemails should I leave? And it's your prospecting cadence that will help to answer those questions, because the cadence is basically the rhythm of your call attempts and the different ways that you reach out, and in terms of how many times, in what ways you reach out. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to actually show you a prospecting cadence that you can get some ideas from, or you could copy exactly. But the reality is that most likely a salesperson is not reaching out enough before walking away from a prospect that's not answering their calls. To help point that out, let's look at a very common scenario of how a salesperson might reach out to a prospect. They first might start by sending an email and introduce themselves. When the prospect doesn't reply to the email, then they call them. Most likely the salesperson will get the voicemail box. At this point, they don't leave a message. Try them again, get the voicemail box again, don't leave a message. Try them a third time. Now they get the voicemail box and decide, okay, well, now I'll leave a voicemail and try to get them to call me back. Prospect doesn't call back. Because they just left a voicemail, they wait a little while, still waiting for the prospect to call back. Now they try them one last time, get the voicemail box, hang up. And at this point, they feel like, I really tried to get a hold of that person. They obviously either don't want to talk to me or I can't get a hold of them. I'm going to move on to other prospects. And if you look at this, you might say, well, that was a good effort and you did everything you could, try to call other prospects. And that might be a reasonable decision to make at this point. But the reality is if we go back to some of our core concepts, prospects are extremely busy. Prospects get called and sold to a lot by salespeople. And with all of that, you're going to have to reach out a lot in order to improve the odds of getting connected. And this simply is not enough. And to show you what I recommend you do, I'll show you now our prospecting cadence, which is many more attempts to reach out than this. And so let me show you what our prospecting cadence is. It's a 4-round cadence. So we're going to basically circle back to the prospect 4 times. And this is what round 1 looks like. On day 1, we're going to start with sending a cold email. Days 2 through 7, so this is basically week 1, we are going to call the prospect multiple times. And in order to call them multiple times within the 2 to 7 day period, we're going to hang up. And we're not going to leave a voicemail message, because if we leave a voicemail message, then we might need to wait before we call them again. So we're going to call many times during this first week without leaving a voicemail message. Now we progress to week 2. And 1 week after we send our first email, we're going to call, and at this point, we're going to leave a voicemail message. Because we just left a voicemail message, we're going to send a voicemail follow-up email. And because we just left a voicemail and sent another email, at this point, we're going to pause for the remainder of week 2. And so this is round 1, week 1, week 2. And what we could use for the emails and the voicemail message in terms of what we say, if you're using our sales messaging approach, we could use your value points building block for these messages. And that completes round 1. We pause. When this pause expires, we progress to round 2. Now, there's a lot of additional steps here that we're moving on to, but the reality is that this is an exact copy of round 1. It's the same exact steps. It's just in week 3, now we're sending another cold email. And during that same week, we're going to call a few times without leaving a voicemail message. as we progress to the next week, on our next call attempt, we're going to leave a voicemail message, send a voicemail follow-up email, and then pause again. And again, if you're using our approach for sales messaging, you could use your pain points building block for these messages. So now we're starting to hit the prospect with a different message. Maybe something else in this message strikes a chord that didn't happen in the earlier messages, or we begin to reinforce and expand on the story we already started to tell. And this is it for round 2. Now we progress to round 3, and again, it's a copy. So we're moving into week 5, same steps, and we're sending a different email, leaving a different voicemail, and sending a different message for the follow-up voicemail. And at this point, what we could do is we could use our name drop building block for this messaging, and then we move on to round 4, same steps, except now we might use our product building block. And so if you could see the progression there in terms of messaging, the first 3 rounds are really more focused on consultative selling, focusing more on the prospect. And it's this last round, around 4, where we're kind of leaning more towards, okay, this is who I work for, this is what I sell. By the way, if we compare this to a product selling salesperson, they typically send this messaging their round 1. And usually what a salesperson does, this is what I experience when salespeople contact me, is round 1 is this product message. And then when they contact me for the second time, it's actually a repeat of the product message from round 1 with some sort of intro like, did you see my last email? Again, this is what I sell. Do you need what I sell? That is our prospecting cadence. And so if you look at it like this, there's a lot of different steps. You could follow this exactly. You could take some ideas from this. There's a couple things that I would recommend you take from this. One is you could look at this, and if we compare this to the first example scenario that many salespeople might do, you could come to the conclusion that, yeah, and most likely a salesperson is not contacting enough. And if they're not contacting enough before moving on, they may be prematurely moving on to close the prospect and move on, labeling that prospect as not interested or not a fit. With this approach, when you reach the end of week 8, you could move on and label the prospect as not being able to be reached, and you're going to move on. Maybe you add that prospect to automated email drip, an email campaign, but you can reach a decision to stop proactively trying to reach out to that prospect. If you do reach that decision and you've gone through these steps, I think you can have confidence that you did not prematurely move on, that you tried to do everything you could to get a hold of that person, and this is just one of those people that you're not able to reach. The other thing that you can do is you could get ideas from this in terms of how to create your own cadence if you don't follow this exactly. But what I don't want you to do is I don't want you to worry about, okay, what day is it? Am I doing a step too early or am I doing a step too late? This is just to encourage you to pursue your prospect, reach out a lot, and keep trying to contact them before you move on. So hopefully you can get some ideas from this. And if you look at this and say, well, that looks great, I like that, but it's a little bit confusing, I want to actually simplify that, because you look at that and it's kind of a lot of boxes and a lot of steps, but it's pretty simple. If we just kind of consolidate what we're talking about here, in week 1, all we're saying is send a cold email and call a few times without leaving a voicemail. That's all we're talking about in week 1. Then in week 2, all we're saying is, okay, now leave a voicemail. Since you left a voicemail, now send a voicemail follow-up email and then pause. So that's all we're saying for week 2. Pretty simple there. Let's not make it overly complicated and get intimidated by all the different steps in the previous slide. So that's all we're talking about. And then from there, we just repeat. So it's not real complicated, and the whole process just repeats that. The other thing I want to point out is that this may look like your cadence is starting on Monday and then going to Friday, and then the next week is starting on Monday and going to Friday. It doesn't need to be like that. Your cadence for a contact could start on Wednesday. You could send your cold email for a particular round on Wednesday. And then what I would advise is when you're going to the next week and you're going to leave that next voicemail message, if you get the voicemail box again, do that around Wednesday. So have a week in between some of these steps, but it doesn't have to start on Monday. It could start on any day of the week. And then that day of the week kind of becomes the reset for the next week, or when your pause expires. And so that's pretty much it. This is the prospecting cadence that we're providing, and hopefully you can at least get some ideas from that. Now let's talk about organizational movement. And what this basically refers to is moving throughout an organization to find additional people to contact and to find an additional way in. The reason why we need to talk about this is because it's difficult to get prospects to answer the phone. There are some prospects that never answer their phone. It doesn't matter whether you call them 5 times, 50 times, 500 times. times they will never answer their phone. Either A, they're avoiding you and they see that it's you that's calling, or B, they're never at their desk and they don't answer their phone maybe ever for anybody. If your key contact that you're trying to reach in order to get into an account is someone that is impossible to get a hold of, if you move on and treat that as I can't get into that account, then you're going to have difficulty getting into a lot of accounts. Let's look at this another way. If instead of having 100 accounts that we're trying to get into and we have one contact at each account, and that's the only person that we reach out to, if we then double the number of contacts at each account and even maybe decrease from 100 accounts to 50 accounts, you will increase your odds of getting into more accounts because you're trying to reach more people at each account. The additional people that you add may also be difficult to get a hold of, but when you increase the number of people at each account, you increase the odds that you're able to get into that account. And this is why we are talking about organizational movement. So this is moving around the organization to try to find additional people to reach out to. There is vertical movement. Vertical movement means moving up and down the organization of the functional department that you're calling into. For example, if we're trying to reach, let's say, the VP of IT and they're never answering our phone and they're extremely difficult to get a hold of, by the way, that's extremely likely. IT is a difficult department to call into, especially at the VP level. So what do we do there? Do we just move on and say, well, I can't get into that account? No, you can move up and down the organization. So to move up would be to call the CIO. Now, by no means am I telling you here today that if you can't get a hold of the VP of IT, that the CIO is going to be any easier. But mathematically, if you increase your prospecting and your approach from one person to two people, you do increase the odds of getting in. And you can also go down the organization to the director of IT. Now, actually, when you do go down, in theory, it should get easier to get a hold of people. The director of IT should be easier to get a hold of than the VP. The manager of IT should be easier to get a hold of. And you can use that to improve your odds of getting into an account. Now, I wouldn't concede to the concept of it's easier to get in at the bottom of the organization and only sell at the low levels of an organization because there's less power there. You should try to reach all the different people. But when you hit a block, it can be a tactic that you can use to try to move down the organization. You should move up and move down, but this is what we refer to as vertical movement. There's also horizontal movement, which is moving sideways in an organization to other functional departments. If we go back to the same example, if we're calling into IT, maybe the VP of IT, or maybe we've done some vertical movement on that side, still can't get a hold of anybody. At this point, we could try to move to a different functional department, such as operations. Now, most likely, if you're doing B2B selling, you can most likely sell into multiple departments. That might not be the case for every salesperson, but if we look at selling technology, software, hardware, whatever, most likely you might feel like, oh, I need to sell to IT because I sell an IT related product. But really, your technology is probably impacting operations. So it could be very likely the case that you could sell into operations, at least find a way into the account through there. In most cases, if you do sell into IT, selling at the business level, which would be operations or marketing, the users of that technology can often be a better way in, quite frankly, but that's a whole nother conversation. But this is what we refer to as organizational movement, moving to another functional department to try to find a way in. And so if we look at what this might look like in terms of the big picture, again, if we're trying to reach the VP of IT, they're never answering our call, we can't get a hold of them. We move up and down the organization, can't get a hold of anybody. We move horizontally to operations and look at all these additional people that we could reach out to. A lot of these people can be difficult to get a hold of, but if we try to reach out to multiple people, again, we can increase our odds of getting in. Now, what we can do is we can actually combine our prospecting cadence with organizational movement in sort of a logical way. Let me show you what that looks like. So if we start our prospecting cadence, let's say that we start this with the VP of technology. We start week 1. When we finish week 2, we're pausing now. After our pause, we're trying to reach out to that VP of technology again. Now we reach the end of week 4. So at this point, we've sent 2 emails, called them a bunch, left 2 voicemails, sent voicemail follow-up emails, pausing for a second time. This is a great place to trigger organizational movement. You could do it earlier or later, but I just think this is a very balanced approach. Let me show you what that looks like. So while we're pausing during week 4, now we try organizational movement. And what this might look like is now we try to find someone else to reach out to in the organization. By the way, a great tool to use for this is LinkedIn. Maybe you have other contacts that you can reach out to, but it's very likely the case that you don't. So at this point, jump on LinkedIn, do some searches for the company according to title or department and whatnot. And most likely you can find someone either moving up or down or horizontally in the organization. When you find someone, then you can then add that new contact to the top of your cadence. So at this point, you send email number 1 and start week 1 with the new contact. At this point, you will now have 2 contacts for that account in your prospecting cadence. You could use organizational movement at this point to find multiple people. But again, I think a very balanced approach is let's focus on 2 people at this time. We have someone at the top of our cadence and someone in the middle. And now we're moving 2 people in parallel through the cadence. With this balanced approach, what you will end up with when you reach the week 4 with contact number 2, you're going to reach week 8 with contact number 1, and that person may fall off. So now at this point, you might do organizational movement to find a third contact, but because contact 1 falls off of your cadence, you're still only going to have 2 contacts that you're reaching out to. And depending on your account list, maybe you need more of a focused approach because you only have a few accounts that you're trying to get into. But if you have a territory and a number of different accounts that you're pursuing, this is a good approach where you're not forgetting about your other accounts. You're focusing on 2 contacts and whatnot. So you can scale that up or scale it down according to your needs. But in general, this is a very balanced approach and hopefully can give you some ideas. Now let's talk about concentrated prospecting. And what this basically refers to is instead of focusing on a large set of accounts, a big territory, or a large number of contacts where we're only reaching out and calling prospects a few times, let's shrink that list and focus more on less accounts, less prospects with more outreach. And it's that change that helps you to do such a thorough prospecting cadence. If you're working a huge list, you might look at that cadence and say, I don't have time to do all that for each contact. But if you do like that cadence, what can help you is to have a more concentrated list. And so I'll give you sort of a concept to keep in mind here, but there's a saying of instead of being a mile wide and an inch deep, try to be an inch wide and a mile deep. And you can apply this towards your territory, which is you could be a salesperson with a huge geographic territory, or maybe you're a business owner and you can sell wherever you want. And when that is the case, you can end up working a huge list of contacts or a huge set of accounts, and you're not getting that concentrated effort that you need. And so you can change that by shrinking that list and really focusing. I'll give you an example of where I started to think about this. I had a salesperson doing outreach for me at one point, and she was great at outreach, sounded great, did a great job, worked very hard. There was one time where I gave her a list of 500 contacts to reach out to. And with this list, she wasn't scheduling any appointments, and it was much below her normal performance. And so I sat down with her to look at what she was doing, and she was starting at contact number 1, calling 1 time, and then working her way to contact 500. And what this meant with the amount of calls she was making, her call attempts were like 2 or 3 weeks in between. And because prospects are very hard to get a hold of, we need a more concentrated approach to improve our ability to either get connected or to get their attention. And she was just calling each person once every 2 to 3 weeks. And what I would classify that as is being a mile wide and an inch deep. So I made one change. I said, okay, I tell you what, I took 50 contacts from the 500, and I said, just focus on these 50 contacts. And what I want you to do is I want you to whittle this list down. So either remove contacts as being not a fit or unreachable or generate leads. And so whittle the list down. And when you get down to 15 or 20, I'll fill you back up to 50. And so this made her be more focused on those individual contacts. And that one small change improved her results. She immediately started generating more appointments. And that's where I started thinking about having a more concentrated approach to improve your ability to get connected and generate leads. In order to do that, I would recommend you build some sort of attack list. So this is either a list of key contacts that you're trying to pursue or key accounts that you're trying to go after. I can't really tell you what the size of list should be for you because it's really a case-by-case basis, because depending on the size of businesses that you're going after, that will impact the number of contacts or accounts on your attack list. For example, if you're going after very large organizations, maybe your attack list is 5 accounts or 10 accounts. If you're going after very small businesses, your attack list could be 25 accounts, 50 accounts, or 25 contacts, or 50 contacts. But the key takeaway here is regardless of the list you buy or whatever your territory is, think of that as the universe. Then take a small chunk of that as your attack list and work through that attack list until you whittle it down and then fill it back up from the master list or the universe that you're working from. So that's pretty much it. These are very simple concepts that try to solve your biggest challenge, which is simply getting connected. And while it can be frustrating that you call and call and call and never get a hold of the people that you need to speak with, you do have control over tools that you can use and levers that you can move up and down to improve your ability. I mean, you still have contacts that you'll never be able to get a hold of, but the workaround there is finding other people in the organization that you can reach out to, or reaching out more often, or improving your messaging. So these are a few levers. Hopefully that gives you some ideas of things that you can do to improve your ability to get connected and to get into and engaged with new accounts. The next training module is dealing with objections, objection handling, how to get around objections and whatnot. And we look forward to seeing you there. If this has helped you in any way, if you found one thing to be helpful or one helpful tip in this video, you can return the favor by simply liking, commenting, sharing this video, or subscribing to our channel. Any or all of those will help us tremendously in terms of our YouTube algorithm, and it's a great way for you to give back. And none of those cost you anything, so we would greatly appreciate that. If you do like our videos and our sales tips, you may want to follow us on any or all of these social platforms. We are posting daily sales tips on all of these. What we're doing primarily is we're taking these long video training webinars and we're stripping them down to find the key nuggets. And each day we're posting basically a key nugget in the format of a 30 to 60 second video on all of these. So if you like these long videos, and we know that these can be difficult to find time to watch and difficult to digest all of this information, follow us on social media and just get your daily sales tip. And that's a good way to kind of remind yourself of these tips and digest this information and slowly implement it into your business. If you want more help and more of this, everything I've been talking about here today is part of the SMART sales system. So SMART stands for sales messaging and response tactics. We basically believe that a salesperson's best sales tool is the words that they say and write in their emails. And so we help salespeople to communicate in the best way, respond to objections in the best way, respond to questions, ask the best questions. And that's our whole approach at how to improve your sales performance. And we deliver that in what we call a sales system because it's a 3-level system that you can implement step by step. So level 1 is SMART sales system helps you to build your sales message. So the system will help you to organize your thoughts so that you know the key and best things to say when you're talking to prospects. Once you've organized your sales message in level 1, the system helps you to put all of that into cold call scripts, cold emails, voicemails, objection responses, and whatnot. So level 2 are your scripts and sales tools. And then level 3 of the system is sort of the how-to. So once you have your cold call script, how to organize and execute in the area of cold calling. Once you have your cold emails, how to do email prospecting. Once you have your objection responses from level 2, get around and how to respond and deal with objection and objection handling. So that's the 3-level system. And again, it is not just, fluffy, concepts. It is organized into a system that you can easily adopt for yourself or for your organization. Now, the good thing here is that if you want to learn more and you're not ready to spend any money, or you don't have budget, or you just want to take a small step forward, you can access the SMART sales system for free on YouTube. So there are YouTube videos that go through all of these steps, and you look for that if you want to learn more. If you are ready to go to the next level above that, the upgrade path from there would be to use our software product called Sales Scripter. So Sales Scripter aligns and helps you to implement the SMART sales system. For example, level 1 is helping the SMART sales system will help you to build your sales message. There's an area in Sales Scripter called the Sales Message Builder that takes you through all these steps and helps you to brainstorm and organize your thoughts and build your sales message. Once you've done that, level 2, there's an area of Sales Scripter called the Sales Playbook that is a library of documents, a library of cold call scripts, cold emails, voicemails, all sorts of documents. Those documents get filled in with your sales message. So that's how the software creates custom tailored sales tools, documents, campaigns for your product, your service, your industry, your prospects. And then the sales scripter will help you with level 3 by providing tools to help you with cold calling, cold emailing, objection handling, and whatnot. Now, if you want more help in addition to the software, the upgrade path from there would be to purchase consulting time with me. I certainly work with a lot of our customers. A lot of our customers just use our software, come in, sign up, come in through the internet. We don't talk to them, and it's all self-service. But there are many customers that want more help. And we are available to provide that through consulting services. We can work with you to help you to implement and adopt the smart sales system. And what that might look like is you could purchase a subscription to Sales Scripter and then purchase consulting hours. And I will work with you to go through level 1 and help you to brainstorm, enter your information, identify your key benefits and pain points and questions to ask, and get all that loaded up in Sales Scripter. And the nice thing there is after just an hour or two of consulting, you will end up with a library in Sales Scripter that we wrote together, that I was involved in helping you to create. And then I can certainly work with you if you want to help you to finalize your script and edit your scripts and your documents that are created by Sales Scripter. And then I can certainly help you with level 3 in terms of executing in the area of prospecting, cold calling, objection handling, and whatnot. But that is how we can help. Another option for you, if you want to explore how the smart sales system can help you, you could purchase the book that I wrote called The Smart Sales System, Sell Smarter, Not Harder. And here's where you can get a copy of that on Amazon. Basically, there's a chapter in the book that outlines each different area of the smart sales system. So there's a chapter on building your sales message, a chapter on cold calling, cold emailing, closing, objection handling, and whatnot. The book basically aligns with the sales training program that's on YouTube. So that is another option for you. It's only $15. So if you just want to stick your toe in the water, that's a small step that you can certainly take. Hope this was all helpful for you. If you want any more information or if you want to contact us, just go to salesscripter.com and you can either get more information, you can sign up, or there is a chat window that you can chat with us and ask us any questions. Hope this was helpful, and we'll see you on the next training webinar.